Welcome to Dub Life Diaries, the podcast where passion meets the open road. I'm Joe Person, your host and also a lifelong dubber. Each episode, we dive deep into the lives of incredible people who have taken these iconic vehicles and turned them into something extraordinary. This show is about community, creativity, and the stories that brings us all together. So buckle up, because this ride is just beginning. This podcast is sponsored by Volksmania magazine. Good times, great cars, awesome Volks maniacs. Visit Volksmania.com to learn more about this class-leading VW magazine. All right, welcome back to Dub Life Diaries. We've got an absolute banger of an episode today, but before we jump into today's guests, I got to give a couple of shout outs. First up on the list is a guy by the name of Paul Cave, Volksmania magazine. This dude is all about the Vdub community and the vibe. Paul, I see all the stuff that you're doing, making sure that the community is successful. This includes allowing promoters to promote their Vdub events across the country for absolutely free. That's amazing. Make sure you check these guys out, Volksmania.com. Killer magazine, absolutely killer people. Also, second in line, another shout out goes out to Jay Brand from Vintage Volkswagen Club of America. That's VVWCA.com. VVWCA.com. Another dude that is all about the community. I reached out to them for some potential advertising for the podcast. Obviously, as a proud member, Jay ended up mentioning this podcast to their entire member base. Now, check this out, guys, listeners. Since these two have given me a push, we have had downloads in 33 U.S. states and 8 countries. That is absolutely rock solid. So, Canada, shout out to you. Germany, shout out to you. Bangladesh, hey, Bangladesh is getting down. United Kingdom, Czech Republic, Japan, Netherlands, Poland. Guys, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the push. The VDubs community is absolutely on fire. Okay. We will get back to today's episode now. All right, folks. Today's guest is a true legend in the community. Somebody whose passion for Volkswagens runs as deep as his love for adventure and craftsmanship. He's a master builder. He's a road warrior. He's a storyteller with decades of experience under the hood, from restoring iconic air-cooled classics to logging miles on cross-country road trips. This guy lives and breathes the dub life. Get ready for some wild stories, some serious wisdom, and a whole lot of love for these rolling pieces of history. Let's give it up for the one, the only, Mr. David Evans.
Yeah, buddy. Hey, how can I live up to that intro?
Man, what's up, David?
Man, wow.
Yeah,
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely, man. Thank you so much for doing it. I am so stoked to have you on the show. Let's go ahead and jump right into this, because we got a whole lot of stuff to talk about.
Let's do it.
So from the beginning, I don't think this was the beginning, because I think you just mentioned that you had a Carmen Ghia before this, but from the beginning that you can remember the date. How about that? You're driving home one day in 1985. You see this busted up 74 Sunbug Super Beetle off on the side of the road and say, you know what? Screw it. I'm all in. I'm going to buy this thing. Tell me a little bit about that backstory. How'd that happen?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to buy a muscle car. I was in high school, couldn't afford a muscle car. And after about 3 failed attempts on the same day looking at cars that I couldn't afford because they needed work, I was on my way home past this 74 Sunbug sitting on the corner for sale for $700. And I was like, you know what? I love VWs. I grew up with VWs. I said, I'm going to buy it. And that started the journey. And I knew nothing about cars. I mean, zero. Nothing.
So what was going on in your life at that moment? Were you just looking for a project, or was this just like an impulse type buy?
Just wanted something cool and unique to drive. And, you know, of course, like I said, wanting the muscle car. Growing up, I was born in the 60s. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, we had a lot of cool car movies, TV shows. It just really got your adrenaline going. You know, early on was Herbie for me, but then it was stuff like Smokey and the Bandit,
Yeah,
the General Lee, Knight Rider, all that stuff.
ooh,
But a lot of really
Michael
cool,
Knight.
yeah, a lot of really cool movies that just kind of, you know, wanted to have a fast car. VWs weren't known for being fast cars, but didn't have the fast car budget. That Beetle definitely fit the budget. And back then, We know they were cheap, really cheap back then to buy and to fix.
Right, right. Times have changed a bit, but you mentioned that the car was pretty bad. So how bad really was it? Was it like shouldn't be on the road bad, or how was it? Explain that for me.
It was close. It was close. It was. Now you got to imagine this car was really only 11 years old, and I think back now, and I said, "Wow, it was only 11 years old." But floor pans were completely gone. It was probably a northern car, and somebody had pieced it together with like sheet metal and pop rivets. I knew nothing. I just looked underneath. I didn't see seats falling through, so I figured it was good to go. So body issues, the engine had problems. I was visiting mechanic shops quite often.
So you didn't know much back then.
Right.
What were some of the most, WTF moments from when you first got into starting to try to fix this thing?
Yeah, really. I mean, because I knew nothing. It was about just how much, potential for disaster there was because you find one problem, then you find the next, you tear into it, there's more and more and more. And the deeper you go, the worse it was.
Well, I swear that's like everybody that restores them these days. That's like that's like what they all say, right? As soon as we start,
Yeah.
it's like the blooming onion. It like never stops
Yeah.
until you're just doing the whole thing, right?
It actually taught me an important lesson on how to buy cars later on, though, going through that car. Yeah.
Well, that was actually probably a good lesson learned then. So fast forward to today, what's your take on the modern trend of, a lot of folks these days are taking these older dubs, these classic cars, and they're attempting to fix them up to restore them really without knowing much about them and then flip them and sell them. What's your take on that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been people who are buying and fixing. I did that when I was younger. I would buy, fix, sell. I did it more because I wanted to have a lot of different VWs. So I would get bored really fast. As soon as the car was done, I was ready to move on to something else. How I determine somebody as a flipper is really somebody who buys a car, does nothing to it, and just puts it up for sale. But there's a lot of people out there who will take a car, improve it, and sell it. And I still do that on occasion now to, earn a little bit extra money. And also it's fun to take something that's, broke and battered and make it beautiful again, and make it nice for somebody else. For me, typically I go through everything that I get and make sure it's top notch before it gets passed on to anyone else, unless it's, a major project and then people know what they're getting into ahead of time.
Right. Well, that's what they buy it as.
The big change in the scene is back in when I started, everything was paper. It was the newspaper or the Auto Trader magazine. So you really had to hunt. Now with the internet, I used to joke that the internet opened up the market to people with more dollars and cents
That's a good statement.
because, a lot of people that knew nothing about cars were out there just buying stuff left and right. And that drove up the prices of a lot of things as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Feels like they haven't stopped. They're just driving them up. They just keep driving them up. I know in a lot of the info that you sent me, which by the way was a lot, you have a lot to talk about and it's exciting. But you mentioned along the way, and again, you don't have to really discuss any names, but you got burned by some sketchy VW shops over time. What was like the worst mechanic horror story that you have?
Well, there was a shop in Tampa that went out of business many, many years ago. And that's where we took my Beetle to get the engine rebuilt. And I'll say that in air quotes, engine rebuilt. Come to find out, the guy's idea of rebuilding the engine was to slap a few used parts on and spray paint it pretty.
Oh no.
Yeah. So when the supposed rebuilt engine blew up, then I found myself in, another shop. But I went from place to place until I finally landed at Total Performance Buggies.
Yeah, so finding Total Performance, this is a cool story. How do you go from guy with a broken Beetle to being offered a job there?
Yeah, so I was frequently visiting Total Performance, and that was on Armenia Avenue near Hillsborough in Tampa. So much so that the owner, Ray Suarez, came to me and he said, "Hey, you're here a lot. How would you like to work here?" And I thought, this is great, an opportunity to learn about the cars, learn how to fix them and, you know, put my passion to actually earning some dollars. So I was all for it.
Paid training.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
so that
pretty cool. What was shop life like?
was interesting because when I started, I was doing, mostly the grunt work, so to speak. Somebody would bring a car in for an engine, get the engine. I didn't pull the engines. They put the mechanics there pulled the engines. I disassembled everything, cleaned everything, did some machine work, cutting cases, heads, putting in case savers, things like that. I wasn't rebuilding engines there. I was just kind of, gradually learning as time went. But then I got offered to run their parts department there to move from the machine shop to the front end, which, I was looking forward to doing something a little bit different. And, air conditioning got a little hot during the summer. So that's what I did for the rest of the time I was there.
Awesome. Any crazy customers or any insane builds that you can recall from back then?
There's always crazy customers, when you're at a shop, and this happens anywhere. Somebody will bring in a car to fix, and the next thing you know, hey, my horn wasn't broken when I came in. There's always these stories.
Back to this. So you get thrown into engine teardowns, you get thrown into machine work. When you first did that, did it feel like you knew what you were doing, or were you a young kid still trying to just wing it?
Yeah, I mean, I was just doing what I was told, learning how to do things. And it was definitely a cool learning experience, getting into tearing down these engines. I mean, you're talking about like crazy stories. I remember tearing down one engine where the customer had never done an oil change on her Beetle. And
Whoa.
if you guys can think about, there was so much sludge in the engine case that it was above the oil pickup. That's what killed the engine. It was completely like solidified in there. When I pulled that engine apart, it was like, oh my gosh, we're talking about several inches of sludge. Never changed the oil. She just kept adding more if she needed it.
Wow. That's crazy. That's cool though. That's cool to hear that it withstood. It withstood.
I don't know how many miles it made it, but
yeah. Ray Suarez, Budweiser sponsored drag bug. How fast was that thing?
I actually had to reach out and ask him because I didn't remember what it was, but he told me that the quickest he did was a 5:24 in the eighth mile. Didn't remember what his speed was on that run, but that's fast. 5:24.
What was the engine?
Well, he ended up originally it was naturally aspirated, but then he went to a turbo setup, and that was kind of his forte there. But we built that entire car at the shop. He built the whole chassis, everything. The cool thing about Ray's from Cuba, so you had to learn to make something if you want it down there. So he was a master at building, and man, he was just incredible at what he did. But yeah, to be sponsored by Budweiser at the time was the only Volkswagen, to my knowledge, that was ever sponsored by Budweiser. And it was an incredible car. And we did a lot of shows up the East Coast, up and down the East Coast, racing. And he even took it out of the country before. I didn't do that.
I was going to ask you, because you had mentioned that. What was it like? I envision it's being something like a rock star that goes to different cities, being sponsored by Budweiser and being that fast. What was traveling the East Coast like and going to these different, big races and big drag strips? And what was that like?
Yeah, it was really cool. There were some challenging times, driving to Virginia, North Carolina, getting lost one time. I remember it taking us like 18 hours to get somewhere because we got lost.
Yeah.
I remember being awake for 3 days on one of these. I'd never been awake for that long. And when I got home, I could not sleep. I could not close my eyes. I was just crazy. I swore I said I will never do that again. And that's when I was young. Driving all night, the things we did when we're younger.
Yeah, yeah. So you're young, you're passionate. You don't even care if you go broke. You're just happy to be in the mix. But looking back, do you feel like those were the best years, or the best years were they still yet to come?
No, I mean, everything has a purpose. Everything is a season in life. I mean, there was a lot of amazing times back then, but I think, as time went on and the longer you're in the scene and the community, you start meeting more and more people. And it's just, it just continues to grow. It really does. There's a saying out there, the best is yet to come. And a lot of times I feel that way,
You built a registry for the very rare 96 VW Golf. Is it a Harlequin?
Yeah, Harlequin. And actually what I did is I took an existing registry that was done by Ross Couples. He created this first registry for the Harlequins. What I wanted to do is I wanted to find rhyme or reason for how Volkswagen built these cars. And I owned two of the cars. I bought them from the same family. And, when I get something like that, I get very into it and get very passionate about it. So I took all of his data and then other data that I found through the internet. And then I also reached out to some Volkswagen employees. Now, I worked for VW years and years prior, but I found people who were willing to run VIN numbers and all for me so I could come up with I wanted to get a comprehensive outlook on these cars, like where they were delivered, different things, a lot more information that Ross had on his. So I just built upon his foundation. But the crazy thing is the more information I got, the less it made sense because you would think these, and I don't know if you know the history of these cars, but Volkswagen took 4 single colored cars, removed them from the main assembly line, then they swapped the body panels on them. So there was, 4 different color patterns. And the crazy thing is, if you look at the build dates and the VIN numbers, they don't line up. And you would think, okay, you should have, one of each color VIN sequential, or maybe, a block of green, block of yellow. Nope. It makes no sense. So all this research I did, I really got further in answering the questions, the rhyme or reason. And the thing with Volkswagen is they've sent out different information. The best we can figure is they did 264 cars, but that's not 100% confirmed.
Okay.
So you take 264 cars divided by 4, because there's 4 different color patterns, makes them probably the rarest Volkswagen ever sold here in North America. So they distributed them in Canada and the US.
And you had 2 of them.
I had 2 of them and I sold them.
Yeah.
And wish I had one of them still. Yeah. I have a Polo Harlequin now, which was the originator in Europe. I have that car now, but it's all different than the Golf. But it was cool being a part of that history. The registry, I released it, for everybody to have online. I haven't really done much updates with it over the years since I don't have the cars anymore. But originally I was working with Volkswagen. They were going to get me a lot of information. Then they changed their tune and said, oh, no, we can't give you any of this information because it's private. So they unfortunately kind of strung me along for about a year. And then they had given me some information originally. And then they put somebody on the case to try to get me more information. And then they changed their tune. So that's when I had to kind of go outside and find people who worked for VW to help me, from dealerships.
It's such a cool thing, though, that with such a small amount of them being made, and just hearing that history of what you already know about them, super cool. Thanks for sharing that. So let's fast forward a little bit. The Steak and Shake scene was a big section in what you described to be, this vibe back then. What made that the hot spot for all the air-cooled guys back in the day?
Originally, it didn't start out that way. Steak and Shake, it was Steak and Shake on Fowler Avenue in Tampa is where all the hot rods and muscle cars, where those guys met on Saturday nights. And we started a small little VW invasion that quickly grew so that we were dominating the night. And we ended up drawing in a lot of people from out of town. And that's how I got involved in my first VW club, which was a Polk County Volkswagen club out of Lakeland.
Yeah.
Those guys started coming to the Steak Chick, and, I joined their club and stayed with them until they disbanded. And then that's when we started the Bay Area VW's club.
Any memorable street racing or any crazy late night antics or anything from back then that rings a bell?
Well, most of us had very slow cars, so that wasn't a thing. We did a lot of cruises, went out to Clearwater Beach. Some people got into trouble, with the police out there. They didn't like the low cars. They would try to ticket you for anything.
Yeah, dark tinted windows. If you had red or blue lights, back
believe
then.
it or not, I drove there with my tag off one time and did not get a ticket. They pulled me over, and I had taken the deck lid off because I put a Judson supercharger on my Beetle, and I wanted to show off the engine driving and forgot to put the plate on the apron. And the lady police officer, she was like, just get your tag back on there. And I was like, oh, thank you for not ticketing me.
I got pulled over on St. Pete Beach way back in the day. We're looking at probably 96, 97. And I had taken my bumpers off because I was going to go with the Cali look for painted bumpers. And I'm telling you, buddy, them bumpers weren't off 2 days. And I got pulled over by the St. Pete Beach police. And they had the dogs come sniff my car out and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, man, y'all, I'm a young kid. You ain't going to find nothing. I know nowadays they're not quite as critical
Yeah, they were brutal back then. I mean, they were measuring headlights, all that stuff. That's why I could not believe I did not get a ticket.
Well, see, there was no crime back then, so they had to do something. Nowadays, they're fighting crime, so they're like, you know what? Let's let the dark tinted windows and all that other stuff go these days.
As long as you're not driving like a crazy person, right? We'll let you.
Right. Well, like you said, 36 horsepower. I'm not going anywhere fast. Let's touch on Polk County VW Club for a moment. At that time, what made that group so special?
Well, that was the first club I was ever in, so it was really cool to be in kind of a little close-knit family, and we did everything. I mean, that club was super active back in the day. It did picnics, we did, like, East Coast beach runs. We'd all caravan over and go to Cocoa Beach, and
Ooh,
a lot of shows we went to, and, it was a lot of fun, and then the guy who ran it, just something happened, and he just kinda pulled out, and the club just folded. Nobody took it over. So there was a void there. And, it was some of the Polk County guys just kind of dispersed and went their own way, but some of them joined us here with the Bay Area Vdub Club when we formed that.
how different was the car scene back then versus now, in your opinion?
Well, there's, I mean, a few differences. Number one, without the internet, right? Everything was word of mouth. In the old days when you had flyers and, little paper newsletters to get the word out about shows and events. So we didn't have the capability of pulling together as many people as you do now. I mean, the scene is huge now, but the real big difference between then and now is the family vibe is different because Volkswagens back then were accessible to everyone. And I always say that's what makes the community so different than any other car community is because, you could have that minimum wage teenager getting into his Beetle and then a doctor driving a Beetle,
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
just runs the whole gamut from, poor to rich, everybody in between. And we all have that connection, that same love for those cars. Now, of course, with how the prices have spiked on so many of the cars, the buses particularly, that's priced those vehicles out for, the average person most of the time. Yeah. So it has definitely changed it. And I'm just hoping, unfortunately, if the trend continues, then, we may end up in that situation where it's a different family dynamic. That's the only thing that I, worry about myself is that, what makes the community so great may change because of pricing people out of it. Yeah.
You had a good point though, where you talk about, there's just something about the '80s and the '90s car scene that, in my opinion, will never be replicated because nowadays, you said it yourself, social media, people are clout chasing. Back in the day, it was just people meeting up, talking smack, driving cars, and that was the culture, that was the vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like internet technology, a lot of that stuff has changed a little bit of that. And then certainly you hit on it, the pricing. That's actually something to bring up and talk about because you're right. It's just like really anything else that's caught wind and has value. It almost prices itself out of a certain market. And I feel like that it continues, like you said, if it continues, that might happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're very fortunate as far as the Beetle goes, 21 million of these cars produced. There are still reasonably priced ones out there,
Yeah.
Since COVID, prices have gone a little crazy, but it's come down, and
Yeah.
I see the cars on Marketplace and,
Yeah.
so that people can afford them, which is good. It's nice to see that kinda coming back down and returning to, I love to see the young kids get into it because, if all us old guys are the only ones in the hobby, eventually we're not gonna be around.
Right. No, totally. 100%. And that's something I like to see too. I like to promote, when I see the young kids that are with them and they have an attraction to them, it I'm like, cuz
Mhm.
I was the same way. I don't know why I liked them. Maybe when I first brought my Beetle home, like I said in '96, I bought a '72 auto stick from the Tyrone Square Mall parking lot. When I first brought it home, I remember my dad made a comment like, "You ain't parking that piece of you know what in my driveway, are you?" And I'm like, "What? This thing is what are you talking about? Look at this thing, it's beautiful." Like I was, I had like got the car of my dreams. Anyway, Let's fast forward just a little bit because this is one of my favorite parts. I feel that this conversation will go in. It's Herbie time, my brother. It's Herbie time. The listeners, he's wearing his Herbie shirt. He'll explain more on that in just a second. The background's all Herbied out. This is absolutely awesome. So I'll start here. Disney offered to buy your Herbie replica in 1998. Just try to summarize. Why did you not take the deal?
Well, got to keep in mind. So I bought the car in 94. I restored it as Herbie in 97. So it was relatively fresh. And I started this Herbie website in 97. That's how Disney found out about me. And it was really strange because the contact that I was getting was, you knew something was weird about it. So I finally confronted the guy. I said, hey, what's up with you? And, why do you want this car? What's going on? And then he said, all right, I'll come clean with you. He said, I'm a purchaser with Disney. And the reason why I don't bring that up is because when I say that, people see dollar signs in their eyes,
Sure.
And I said, well, I'm not like that. I said, I may possibly sell a car because even though I loved it, I didn't have the deep historic connection that I have with it now back then because it was relatively fresh. And he told me they were building this love bug themed hotel in Orlando and they wanted to put the car outside on display. As soon as he said outside, I was like, no. I said, I don't want the car to sit outside and be trampled on by people and destroyed. I said, it's, not that it was a mint car. I bought it from the original owner, but I just couldn't see that happen to the car. And I told him, I said, look, I'd be more than happy to help you build a car. I said, I can bring you all the decals, the graphics, everything, and, help you build a car. I said, I won't charge you anything just to make sure it's done right. I'll drive up to Orlando, bring you all this stuff. And the guy's like, great, come on up. And it was funny too, because when they invited me up, I said, should I call you when I get on property? He goes, I'll know you're there. So as soon as people saw Herbie come in the property, they were radioing this guy, hey, Herbie's here.
Cool. Yeah.
He took me on a tour.
I want to hear more. Yeah. Tell me more. I want to hear more about this.
He took me on a tour of the property. And it was cool because they were in the middle of the construction. So you had there's two wings of this complex. It's the All-Star Movies Resort on the Disney property. And two wings are Herbie themed. One side has a giant front of Herbie. The other side is the rear of Herbie. And then they had these huge tools that they were getting ready to attach to the sides of the buildings. Like 915 millimeter wrench. I mean, I don't remember the numbers, but they were laying on the ground bigger than, tractors. So I got up to be able to touch them. And it was really cool to see that. And then they took us to the warehouse, Disney's fabled warehouse where they keep all their goodies. And ended up, they had found that they still had the original Herbie parade car that they used up through, I think it was 1990. And he said, this is the car we're going to turn, put on display. And they also showed me they had some Herbie go-karts up in their warehouse too, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So I gave them all the materials and they gave me, like a tour of the car and all. It was pretty cool. It was electric, to go down the Main Street parade and the front trunk would open. The characters could jump through and come inside the car like they're being eaten.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So you say you helped them build it. Did you turn any wrenches for their?
No. So it was basically just providing the information to the Imagineers so that they could do the car correctly. Unfortunately, they did not do the car correctly. Whoever was in charge, when the guy called me, he goes, I want you to come see the car. He goes, but you're not going to be happy with it. I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, basically everything you brought us, they just threw away and did it their own way. And what they tried to do time, I don't know. I guess they just saw the way it looked and said, well, we're just going to restore it back that way because that's the way it looked. So the sad thing was it didn't even match the Herbies that were on the buildings. But over the years, they actually did listen to fans and they did restore the car to look much more accurate over the years because it's been restored multiple times because it does get damaged and, just beat up by people standing on it. And
did they get any advice from you over the years? Did you stay connected?
No, because the person that I had connection with ended up leaving, but he was also, my car, we got to open that hotel, which was cool in January of 99. For 2 days, the car actually met guests at the front lobby. And the car has a remote horn. So I gave the employees the remote so they could talk to people, have Herbie talk to people. And what was really cool is not only did they give us, 2 days stay and, park access, but they also made us official employee badges. So Herbie actually has an official Disney employee badge on the dash.
So tell me more about your car. Set the stage for our listeners. What was it like when you bought it? You said you bought it what year?
Well, I met the original owner in 1988.
And it was
I tried, one owner, school teacher. She bought it new in Germany. It was a US spec car that was, going to be shipped back over to the States after she finished working there. She was a school teacher.
What year?
Well, 63 the car is.
Yeah.
And she was pulling up to a shopping plaza and I saw the car and I was, of course I'm this young kid who wants to buy and sell cars. And I was like, look at that. It's a white 63 ragtop. It's Herbie right there. Perfect car. Don't have to repaint it. Don't have to do anything. So I went up to her, asked her if she wanted to sell it. She said, no, but I do need somebody to work on it. So I said, I'm your guy. So when I was living at home with my parents, and anytime she needed something, she brought it over and I fixed it. And I always did extra free stuff, hoping one day she would sell it to me. And I had, long moved out and I got a call from my parents. Hey, Mary's getting ready to move to Virginia. She hasn't driven the car in 6 months. It won't start. She wants to know if you want to fix it or if you want to buy it. And I said, you know what that answer is.
Yeah, it happened.
I went over, checked it out, and we discussed price, and I ended up getting the car for $1,200, which, believe it or not, I didn't even have $1,200. She let me make payments for a couple of months.
Oh man, it's so cool.
And fix it in her garage so I could drive it home.
I love hearing these types of stories.
But then the first drive, the tires were so low on air. My first thing was to go to the gas station. And as I'm turning the gas station, the back tire came off the rim. I had to try out the VW jack and spare for the first time on my first drive. And fortunately, the spare was good and the jack worked. So got back on the road. So tires were my first thing.
Fast forward just a little bit. Obviously, a lot of attention around your car over the years. What's been one of the craziest fan interactions that you've had with your Herbie?
Early on, you had to keep in mind, back when I did this car in 97, there weren't any Herbie replicas anywhere. I don't say mine was the first ever. It wasn't the first ever, but mine, there was a guy in Arizona named Bob. He had the first replica that had the correct Disney font 53s on it. Prior to that, all the Herbies you would see were just kind of random 53 numbers.
Right.
So my car is the second one to have the correct 53 font. But because I launched this website in 97, it became the most widely known Herbie replica in the world. Actually, I laughed that I have the honor of having the most stolen picture of Herbie on the internet. On everything, I took a picture out at Fred Howard Park on the Causeway. Really beautiful picture. It came out great and posted it on my website. It got lifted for shirts, for mouse pads, cups, posters, artwork. I mean, you name it. It was on, and you probably could still find it today out there on stuff that people have. And believe it or not, that's kind of how I ended up in the Herbie Fully Loaded movie in 2005.
Yeah. We're gonna get to that. So you got this cameo in Fully Loaded. Tell me how that happened.
Yes, that was because of that picture, the one I said. So apparently, when Disney was, I almost considered selling my car to Disney to be used in that movie at one point. It was kind of interesting, but I was like floating the idea, but I, really didn't want to do it, but thought about it. But anyways, when they were doing, I guess, the build up to the film, whatever Hollywood does, mock-ups and this and that, they ended up using that picture that I mentioned in the film. They used it for promotion of a book on Amazon, which when the book came out, they removed it and put the correct picture. But my car was on the front of this. I have it on my herbiemania.com website, which is a website locked in the 90s. So if you want to see an old school website, that's but that picture, I have that book, that cover on Amazon on there. But what happened was apparently they used it in other things, including the movie. But when they finished the movie, all the editing was done. They left my car in the film. So it's a real small scene, and it didn't even register with me when I first saw the film because I was at the premiere. I had the car at the premiere locally.
Yeah, cool.
And somebody pointed out, that's your car there. And I had to rewatch it. I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. It is. So it kind of made my car an official movie car, which is kind of weird. People ask me, is this one from the movie? I'm like, well, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, you're not lying. It's there.
It is in the movie, but it was never owned by Disney. But it worked for Disney too, so it's kind of weird. But the thing about it is, it's more than just being Herbie, because there's been so many great stories. You're talking about, reactions to the car. Early on, when I first did the car, the biggest thing I remember, I was driving down Fowler Avenue towards USF, and I was at a traffic light. I think it was like Fowler and 50th Street. And I hear somebody screaming. And I look to my left, and it's this young girl screaming Herbie. She was so excited. And I mean, her face, like she hit the lottery. She was so excited. And I was, my gosh. But that started the trend of just people's reaction, yelling, screaming, beeping, thumbs up. I mean, I've owned a lot of cool Volkswagens. And I know a lot of people in the VW community, like Herbie's played out. You see a lot of Herbies. But the thing is, it makes people smile. And that's Volkswagens in general. They make people smile.
Yeah.
But,
I think my favorite thing, just to stop right here, because it just started in my mind when you said that. My favorite thing about driving a classic Volkswagen is everywhere you go, no matter what, I don't care, culture, color, doesn't matter. Everybody has a story.
Yep.
With a classic Volkswagen, and it brings those stories out of people, right? They're all, again, I could be taking my wife to dinner, and it's date night, and and all of a sudden out front, of a restaurant somewhere, you'll have, people talking about, some memory they have from 40, 50, 60 years ago. And it's just like, man, that's just so cool. It's one of my favorite things about driving them, for sure, is hearing all the stories.
It is. I mean, and Volkswagens are not just a car; they're like part of the family.
Yeah,
that's what makes them different. You're talking about bringing your Beetle home and your dad seeing it. For me, how can you be unhappy with a Beetle? They have a smiling face. They kind of radiate joy.
truly.
They're happy little cars.
Truly. Yeah. I think he was more worried about maybe the trademark of the oil leak.
Yeah, that's marks their spot. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
And then transitioning to more modern times with Herbie, because I've had Herbie for 30 years. It's hard to believe I've owned that car 30 years. Most of my life I've owned that car. This year I'll actually be 31 years. I'll finally match the original owner's amount of time. Yes, ownership. So December of this year will be 31 years. So then I can finally be tied.
So also to mention, you were interviewed for the Love Bug DVD special features. What was it like being a part of VW and kind of the whole pop culture history?
Yeah, that was I was very fortunate because this guy named Hugh Chitwood, who lives out in California, worked for Disney at the time. He saw my website, and he contacted the production company that was working on doing the first DVD for the Love Bug. They were doing a 2-disc special edition, first time on DVD. And he had them reach out to me. They wanted to do a fan interview. And what was nice about it was they were very open to my suggestions, because they were going to send a film crew down to Tampa, where I live. And I said, hey, do you guys know about this Herbie themed hotel that had just opened in Orlando? I said, how about I drive up there and we shoot it there? And they're like, that sounds cool. Let us get back to you. And that's exactly what happened, is they decided to shoot it there. So I was invited on property to, do the interview there. They did an interview inside a hotel room, and then they did one outside. The one that was outside, none of that made it into the video. And I actually do have a videotape of kind of behind the scenes, but believe it or not, of all the videotapes I have, that's the only one it won't play. So I have to get it fixed. And when I get it fixed, I'm going to convert it, and I'll probably put it on my YouTube channel, down the road. But
yeah, super cool.
It was a really surreal experience being there. And, if anybody watches that special features, which you can, it's on YouTube. I was really nervous. I didn't know how to act, how to talk. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm wearing the same shirt that I was interviewed in over 2 decades ago, just for fun, for this interview.
So awesome. If I tried to squeeze into a shirt from 2 decades ago for myself, hats off to you, my brother. I wouldn't be able to fit into it, but
yeah. Well, it was a big shirt then, so it's
Yeah, yeah, okay. Why do you think Herbie is so universally loved? Like this little German car somehow became a cultural icon. What is it about this little car that hits people so deep?
the main story about the love bug, really, it's an underdog story. You think about it, you've got this little meek VW Beetle that ends up having just, a heart of gold and ends up beating all these, Ferraris and Porsches and everything else. Obviously it's a fantasy movie here, but it's an underdog story. We all love underdog stories, no matter what they are. And of course, as a character, is very endearing. And, if you look at the history of Disney, how they picked the Beetle, they set up different model cars in the Disney studios and watched people's reaction to them. And the VW was the only car that people actually talked to and petted. And they knew that was their car, because people had, like we're saying, they're happy little cars. And, that Star was born. And then there was a German version called Dudu, the Super. It was like a spy beetle. It was kind of like a James Bond beetle, had all these gadgets. And, there, of course, cartoons. You had like Speed Buggy, Wonder Bug. I mean, so many things copied Herbie's, I guess, car coming to life persona. So it really set the path for all that. And growing up as a kid, of course, I was too little to remember the original movie in theaters, but I saw it later on. I do believe Herbie was the first film probably I saw in that I can remember in the theater. And
My first film that I remember in a theater was Rambo, First Blood Part 1.
whoa,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a big difference from Herbie. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say. But you said you're first, so I just had to go there. Yeah. And that also maybe will give you a little bit of age for me too. I think that was early 80s. I'll tell you, I was definitely too young to probably be in a Rambo
Yeah.
film. But
You're not as old as I am.
no, I'm not. I'm not. But that was my first movie. So you were writing the Herbie history piece for VW Trends. This is a cool story because it also landed you on the cover of VW Trends. Let's talk about that real quick. When you were writing that piece, did you ever imagine for any second that, one day you'd wake up and see yourself on the cover?
No, that was a huge surprise. And I had written for VW Trends in the 90s, a column for a while, and was very fortunate to be able to get, have this opportunity to write this Herbie history. What Volkswagen or VW Trends was going to do is they were going to do a feature on my car. And I think I'd mentioned to you before that back in the 80s, I had this custom Carmen Ghia that VW Trends was supposed to do a feature on, but the person who was coming to cover the show was leaving the magazine. He said, "I'm not doing any features." Unfortunately, the car was slated to be sold shortly after, so I never got a feature on that car. So when they told me they wanted to do a feature on Herbie, of course, I was all excited about it. And if you've ever done a magazine feature, they give you these papers to fill out, all your details, the specs, and I'd done that. And then, I floated the idea about the Herbie history, and they said, "Well, we'll do both. We'll do the feature on your car, and we'll do the Herbie history in the magazine. It'd be like a Herbie issue." But, at the time, and the reason why I started my website, there was no history on Herbie. You couldn't find anything. I say, mine was the first Herbie website on the internet, 97. That's my claim to fame, right? But I wanted to be able to, kind of get the story of Herbie out to the masses. And of course, VW Trends magazine, you had VW Trends, Hot VWs, the two biggest magazines at the time.
Yeah.
And that was an incredible opportunity. The only thing is, with a magazine, you've got so many pages you have to work with. So even with my crazy editing of this Herbie story, I could not condense it down enough to fit that story in with the feature article. I made the decision to dump my feature article and just do the Herbie story. And it was a hard decision because I was like, my dream was to have a feature in a magazine. Everybody wants to have their car featured in the magazine.
Sure.
But I said, I thought it was more important to get that Herbie story out than anything else. So, and not a lot of people know that story. And I still have that paperwork in my, VW archives that I filled out for that feature, which was kind of cool. I stumbled upon it a couple of years ago, going through some boxes. But
what was the year and the month that you were on the cover?
It was June 2000. And I joke to people, like, sometimes, you'll get at like a work function, they'll say, name something people don't know about you. And I'll say, I was a magazine cover model.
Yes, you were.
And,
Yes, you were.
I'm there driving the car on the cover. But yeah, it was crazy because when, I submitted the article, and even then it still needed to be edited to fix. And I just told, Ryan Price, who was the editor, I said, do whatever you can. I can't make it any shorter. I've already butchered it enough to try to make it fit.
Right.
If you read it, you'll see it doesn't read exactly, it's not great writing because of the editing I had to do on it. But he told me, he says, you're going to be real pleased when you see the magazine come out. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you'll see.
That's
So
so
that
great.
issue comes in the mail to me. And I was like, what? I'm on the cover? You got to be kidding me.
Oh, that's so awesome, man. What was the reaction like locally? Big scene here. Big scene.
The thing about it is the, the crew that we have now is a big crew. Back then, it wasn't as many people. Everybody thought it was really cool. Of course, your friend gets in the magazine is cool, but on the cover, wow, it's really cool.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I'm just a guy, just like, anybody else. And, and it's funny too, because everybody that knows me here, I'm just a VW guy, just like anybody. I'm no different. And, I'm not any more special than anyone. I have a long history being in it, but that's about what it is. Just like your intro, man. I felt like a king with your intro.
Dude, you are.
But
I told you, I told everybody, I'm coming to spread some flowers out for you guys that paved the way and have stayed consistent in this scene the whole time. I'm coming for you. Anybody else listening, I'm coming for you.
I have a love for the cars. I have a love for the community. And, I've always wanted to do whatever I can to further that community. And, it was always, growing up, I was a very introverted person. And getting the Volkswagens brought me out of my shell. Of course, when you have a car that gets a lot of attention, people want to talk to you. So you have to, be personable. So people who knew me then and know me now, they're like, really? You were an introvert? I'm like, yeah, I still am, but it depends on the situation. But yeah, they're social vehicles. And, of course, all the events we go to and
Yeah.
just so many great times. And that's the thing with having this car as long as I have, it has so much sentimental value to me, the things we've done and really the people that I've met too, when we did I did a Herbie show in 2000. We've done a few of them. The 50th was one that Gail Love put on. And it was an amazing show. And I've been to a lot of shows. You imagine from the 1980s, we're talking 40 plus years here.
Yeah, sure.
That shows my age, right? And it was the most spectacular VW show I've ever been to in my life. What he put together. But the thing was, it wasn't the cars. Now, granted, these are all Herbies, right? So people are like, every car is the same. They're not, because everybody does their own little style. But the thing is, it was the people there. We talk about how great our community is, right? But when you have that singular interest, that passion, people, they love their VWs, but they love Herbie, right?
Yes.
So you just, it's like crazy. It's like a fire being lit, with people just sharing the love and come up. Yeah.
Yeah.
That passion. And it was at that event that I met these teenage kids who came up to me and were crying to meet me. And I was like, what is going on? They had watched me on this DVD that came out, 20 plus years ago as a kid, and they grew up watching me on these special features. And, they were like, can I, sit in your car? I'm like, of course, I built my car so kids can climb on it, and didn't worry about any of that. I wanted people to be able to enjoy it. And they were like sitting there in tears, and we're talking about guys and girls. And I was like, wow, like I said, I'm just a guy. I didn't know this side of the story. That I had these people that looked at my car like I looked at the original Herbie when I was a kid. Right. I had a couple of them tell me, they're like, your car means more to me than those actual movie cars. I'm like, what? How can that be? But it just goes to show you don't realize what kind of impact you can have, just like you doing this podcast. You don't know what kind of impact you'll have. You may trigger a memory, something like that really sparks somebody's passion, and it's great that you're doing this. So I was excited when you invited me to come on.
Oh man, thank you. Yeah, I saw that needed to be celebrated. What I feel when I go to these local shows, the families, the people, the connections, the friends, forget the cars for a second, like you just said. It's all about the people.
Right.
And, it's just something I saw. Like, earlier you had mentioned there was a small void. I just feel like with a lifestyle like this, it has to be celebrated. I mean, what an amazing story. I mean, just sitting here talking to you and listening to all this cool Herbie history and learning like cameos and I mean, dude, that is just we're talking about a VW Beetle where anybody that's outside of what we do would be like, yeah, big deal, right? But we know and listen, all these stories, we got teenagers crying and you're just such an awesome person, man. Something else that you had mentioned was you're actually building or in the process of building a VW community garage. Tell me a little bit about the mission behind this community garage.
Yeah, always wanted to have a dedicated garage workspace, and I finally bought a property that was big enough to build a garage on. Prior to that, I've always worked in, pretty much a one-car garage space, but I just had the idea come to mind to, once this is built, to open it up to the community, people who want to learn to work on their cars, specifically teenagers. I'm looking to, reach the teens and give them something to do that, is constructive and they can learn. And, you talk about, growing up, I didn't really have any mentors growing up, and it's nice to have somebody that you can learn from. And I'm not an expert. I'm a, capable guy. I'm not an expert. I've done this long enough, but just being able to learn with somebody and somebody, I'm very patient and I like teaching people. And, I'm not the one that's going to scold you if you, do something wrong. I'll be right there by your side to help you. And there's a couple of young guys now in the community that I'm trying to, encourage to help. Have you seen my off-road Beetle Ocho that I built this year?
Yeah.
I had a couple young guys from the Herbie community actually come out that did not know how to work on cars. And that's when I hurt my back and I couldn't do the front end swap by myself. So I had them come out and pretty much directed them what to do. And, I helped them where I could help, and they pulled the front end out, and it was, they learned and we had a great time. They, built some confidence learning to work on the cars. And that's what I'm hoping with this garage, that people be able to come and it'd be like a little community place. Maybe we can do, I don't know, once a month or whatever the case may be, where people come over, hang out, work on their cars, and
I mean, that's just
stuff together, do life together.
I don't want to miss that. I want to be a part of that. I just appreciate the fact that you want to help teenagers learn real skills. Tell me why that's so important to you. It feels like that's something that's really just kind of a piece of your fabric. Why is that so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I started out not knowing anything about cars. And because I worked at Total Performance, I had people there who knew these cars inside and out teach me. First thing I ever learned how to do was to fix a parking brake on a Beetle. It's not adjusted right. You pull it up, boom, it comes apart. But, there's a lot of people that are impatient in this world. And a lot of kids get discouraged and they don't build any confidence. And, we're talking about mentorship. That's such a big thing I think that's missing from this world is, being able to let kids, do something like if they have an interest in cars, get out there and not feel the pressure of having to, like being in a job where you have to perform and you're evaluated, just in a relaxed setting where you can learn and you can make mistakes and not have to feel like you're being judged, and, just a nice environment that supports you in your passion. If something, maybe they decide, hey, I want to do this for a living. You may do it just like, oh, it's not for me, but as a hobby, it's cool. But either way, it's good. But just give somebody that opportunity to either ignite that inside passion that they may have, or, even just be a place like, okay, I thought I wanted to do this, but maybe I really don't. And we don't have that affordability a lot of times. There's a lot of kids that come out of school. I was like that. I had dreams when I was younger of actually designing cars, but I was terrible in math. I had some like learning issues, and I didn't realize till I got in college that I got an amazing teacher that I just learned differently than most people.
Yeah.
But I was quite discouraged for most of my high school years because I didn't think I was smart enough to get it. So I abandoned that dream and, went down different roads. But, ironically, I ended up working in the car industry for a lot of years. But yeah, just I understand that frustration. I just want to make sure that I'm able to try to give back to the community in the way I can. You know, I didn't have anything like that growing up, but it'd be cool to have a community garage to use. And
Well, back in the day, and you can remember this too, I'm sure, we used to have the shop that we would go to, and there was always that old guy in the shop that could give us those, little one-liners and those little tips. Nowadays, these kids just log into YouTube and they
yeah,
watch a couple videos. Hell, they probably even watch some of yours, but they watch some videos and they're like, yeah. So that element, I agree that it's kind of missing the mentorship aspect. So I appreciate that in you, that. But I'll ask you, how do you want to pass down, all the years of experience? How do you want to pass that down? You're patient. We're going to do this community garage. You're going to do this community garage idea. How do you want to pass down everything that you've learned?
well, I'm hoping if we can get some of the younger folks, out there and just learn by my past mistakes. There's a lot of stuff I've done wrong, and I'm still learning today. Like I said, I'm not an expert in everything.
Yeah, it's great.
I took things to a certain level and just kind of stayed there. But there was a lot of years that, like you mentioned, you kind of got out of things for a while. I was never out of Volkswagens, but I toned it down quite a bit. I mean, there was a time where I was working on them every week, and then marriage, family, it tapered off. And that's why people online laugh at me, because I'm pretty much stuck in the 90s. Like, I see the prices of stuff and my mind is blown, because that is kind of when I stopped for a while, like in the late 90s. There was a big gap there. And then when I got back, into doing more events and things like that, it was like culture shock to see how things had changed. But, one thing I never stopped was the bug jam, doing that, since 89. But I'd scaled way back on VW events. I used to go out of state everywhere, and I didn't do that anymore. It was local only.
No, you said it. You said it. You life takes over, and you never lose that love. I never lost the love. I've always appreciated, number one, the logo, number two, the look, and then when I start going back and having and looking at pictures, and I used to dream a lot. So back in the day, eBay, used to have a moto or a motor app portion where you could, it was a separate download, and I could log in and I could just scroll through pictures. So, I could learn the engines, I could learn the transmission matches, I could learn all the, and I could look at pictures. But here's the thing I was going to say. I'd go back and look at these pictures and I'd be like, I can still smell those seats in my Beetle. Right? And like, what else can connect like that in our lives? Really nothing. So the true fans, they know what's up. They're out there, they're listening to this podcast. All right, couple questions, rapid fire style. What's the best air cooled VW ever made? Not your favorite, the best. The best.
The best air cool. I have to say, Beetle. I mean, really, probably I think Volkswagen's most popular would be like a 6970 Beetle. And those are probably one of the greatest Beetles, even though I was very much old guy, 67 and earlier guy, but they drive nice. They're comfortable. They, still have a classic look.
Yeah.
So that was probably the best air cooled. And I think that was the pinnacle of probably VW's quality then too, back in that day.
What about water cooled? What's the best water cooled VW ever made?
Gosh, probably the Mark I Rabbits Golfs, I mean, they were awesome cars. I own quite a few of them. Believe it or not, I bought a 6-year-old Rabbit for $950. That's how cheap things were back then. With 60,000 miles on it.
I just want to go back in time, I'll acquire like 25 of them and find a way to store them somewhere.
That was my first Volkswagen with air conditioning. And from that point on in life, I always had at least two. The air cooled fun one for the weekend, and then the water cooled for the go to work or school one.
Yeah, understood. What's the most overrated classic VW?
All right, I'll get the hate mail on this one. Split window bus.
Okay, tell me why.
You want to know why?
Yeah,
I love them. Absolutely, one of my favorite Volkswagens. But have you ever driven one? The coolness factor is off the charts. But I went from a couple of split windows to a bay window to a van again. I went all through the generations. And really, once I hit the bay window, I was like, I'll never get a split again. I just love this way too much. But, based on when you say overrated with how much they sell for, versus they are cool, no doubt about it. So hopefully not too much hate mail on that. But
I don't think you'll get any hate at all. That's honest. That's just honest. Hey, look, man, we're getting older. It's hard to fit in.
Comfort is coming into the picture now.
Yeah, comfort's important for sure. And Stephanie Frank said the same thing. The bay window was her favorite as well, even to use them for business like she does. For the same thing that you mentioned, for the comfort and that type of stuff.
They drive better, they ride better, they're more roomy. But
and you see, there's a lot of bay windows in movies.
Yeah.
Even still, even in commercials, there's just, I feel like that's a very celebrated body style for sure. For sure. All right. So if you could have, now we're going to talk about your favorite. I'm going to ask every guest that comes on the show, they got to answer this question right before we wrap things up. But if you could own one VW from any era, what would it be?
And that's a hard question, but I'll have to say my dream Volkswagen was always a 49 Hebmuller.
Ooh.
That's the one I always wanted. And really any pre-50 Beetle, but that one was always on top of my list. But definitely out of the affordability range.
Well, you never know. You never know. So where can people find you, buddy? How can they get involved eventually if you do this community garage? Like, just give us, maybe where we can catch up with you.
Yeah, well, right now I've got a YouTube channel, Dub World VW Adventures. If you type in Dub World VW, you'll probably find it. Also, if you're on Facebook, we've got a few different pages. Of course, I got HerbieMania.com on the internet, but we have a Herbie the Love Bug fan club on Facebook, the Florida VW shows and events page. I've got a lot of different pages online, but of course, local Volks, different, Bay Area VDubs, there's a lot of different things on there that you can find me. And eventually, once this garage is built and open, we'll be doing an open house and have a nice party.
I'm excited for that. I'm coming. I'm going to be learning.
I hope you'll be there.
I'll be putting my learning cap on. That's going to be awesome. I'll be super excited for that. You're a super awesome guy, man. Thank you so much for your time in doing this. Final words for the listeners who are just getting into the VW world now. Give me some final words for them.
Yeah, for anybody that's new, the best advice I can say is if you're looking to buy a car, try to find something that's maybe an older restoration that just needs a little bit of refreshing. Something that you can look at and it hasn't been patched up. And, an older restored car is going to be a little bit more honest to look at. But make sure you have somebody that knows these cars when you look at them. And things are not cheap like they used to be, So you want to make sure you're getting the best car, for your money. And, just keep that in mind. Whenever you buy something, it's going to need more. And save that money so that you don't get in over your head.
Yeah.
Great hobby. You're not just getting a car, you're becoming part of the family.
Amazing words of wisdom. Thank you, man, so much for your time.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Dub Life Diaries. Thanks for riding along with us and diving into these incredible stories of the people in the dubs that drive their dreams. If you love today's episode, don't forget to subscribe or hit that follow button so you never miss an adventure. Do you have a story to tell or know somebody else who's living the dub life? Awesome! Reach out to us. You can find us on all socials at Dub Life Diaries or shoot me an email. I'm not hard to find. dublifediaries@gmail.com. Until next time, keep the engines humming and the wheels turning and always follow the road that inspires you. This is Joe Person. I'm signing off. I'll catch you on the next ride.